the reclamation of Jackson Street. In the heart of a city where tension had long simmered beneath the surface, there was a neighborhood named Jackson Street. Once vibrant and full of life, it had become overrun with fear. The local gang, a group of men who had used violence and intimidation to control the streets, was particularly cruel to the residents they deemed outsiders. But there was one man who refused to be intimidated. Leonard Leo Harris was a 32-year-old barber with a deep love for his community. He'd grown up on Jackson Street and had seen the transformation it had gone through over the years. Once a place of pride, now a shadow of its former self, every morning he opened his small barbershop, the Harris Fade, and spent his days giving haircuts to anyone who needed one, no questions asked. But on this particular day, Leo was about to face something that would test not just his courage, but the strength of his entire neighborhood. It started with a simple confrontation. Leo had just finished cutting a local teacher's hair when he stepped out to grab a coffee. That's when he noticed them, the gang members, the same group that had been harassing everyone for weeks. They were standing across the street, sneering at the people walking by. As Leo crossed the sidewalk, one of them called out to him, "Hey, Harris. Think you can just run your little shop here like you own the place?" The gang member, a tall man with a heavy, mocking tone, yelled. Leo stopped in his tracks. He could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on him. This wasn't the first time they'd tried to intimidate him, but Leo had always avoided confrontation. He was tired of running. He was tired of pretending the problem wasn't right in front of him. He turned and faced the gang. "I'm not going anywhere," Leo said firmly. Locking eyes with the leader, a man named Rocco, whose reputation for cruelty had made him infamous in the area. Rocco smirked. "Oh, we'll see about that, won't we?" he said, stepping toward Leo with two of his men flanking him. Leo's hands were steady as he crossed his arms. "You think because you've got numbers you can push people around?" he asked, his voice calm but resolute. The tension was thick in the air. The street fell silent, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Rocco took a step closer, his face inches from Leo's. "You really think you can stand up to me, huh?" Rocco growled, his hand inching toward his belt, where he kept a knife for just such occasions. But Leo didn't back down. Instead, he moved with surprising speed, grabbing Rocco's wrist and twisting it behind his back. The gang leader let out a sharp grunt of pain, stumbling forward as Leo pushed him to the ground. The other gang members froze. "You don't own this street," Leo said, his voice booming. "I'm not scared of you, and neither is anyone else here. This is our street." The crowd that had gathered, watching from their windows and doorways, erupted in cheers. People who had been silenced for far too long felt a spark of hope ignite. One by one, they started stepping out into the open, some with phones raised, others with fists clenched. The power dynamic was shifting. Rocco, humiliated and enraged, tried to stand up, but Leo kept him pinned. "You've been terrorizing this block for too long, and it stops now," Leo continued, his voice unwavering. "You don't get to decide who belongs here." The gang members exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the easy mark they'd expected. Leo wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been pushed around by them. His words carried weight, and the people of Jackson Street, all at once, began to realize they no longer had to live in fear. Seeing the situation slipping out of his control, Rocco signaled for his men to retreat, but before they could make their escape, Leo released his grip, giving them a chance to back off. The gang members slunk away, disappearing into the shadows from which they came. The crowd surged forward, cheering Leo's name. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" they chanted. The tension in the air lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unity. People clapped him on the back, shook his hand, and praised him for standing up when no one else would. But Leo's victory wasn't just about him. It was about the courage that sparked in every heart around him. That day, something shifted in Jackson Street. No longer would the people cower in silence. No longer would they let a gang dictate their lives. From that day forward, the neighborhood began to rebuild. It wasn't just the physical buildings that were repaired, but the trust among the residents. Jackson Street was no longer a place ruled by fear. It was a place where people stood up for each other, where every voice mattered. And as for Leo, he continued to cut hair. But now his shop wasn't just a place for trims and fades. It was a symbol of resilience, a safe haven where the community could come together. Jackson Street had been reclaimed, and the people had learned that sometimes the smallest act of defiance could change everything.